Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. Khan is here, and so am I, and we're here to review the Nike StreakFly 2. So don't forget to like, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications, and leave a comment to make Khan happy. All right, let's talk about the specs and features of the Nike StreakFly 2. And I've just taken these out of the box. I have not had them on foot yet. So these are definitely my first impressions without having run in the shoe. We'll start with the upper. It is a single layer mesh upper, very similar to the single layer mesh upper on the Vaporfly 4, which has a tiny bit of stretch to it, a little bit of elasticity, but if it fits like the Vaporfly 4 does, then it's going to be nice and snug, good fit for a racer. There's just a little bit of reinforcement around the lacing system. It is not an asymmetrical lacing system, it's symmetrical, has the same not as serrated laces as the Vaporfly 4 does. That means there's some toothiness, some grip to them, but they're a little more slick. They're not quite as toothy as I like. Tongue is very thin. There's just enough padding to go over the lacing system, but it feels like a track spike tongue. Many people would describe this as a track spike for the road. There is an impressive amount of padding around the heel collar for a shoe that weighs this little. And there's a little bit of structure in the heel counter, but it's pretty much no heel counter there. And there's a little flip tab, sort of like the original StreakFly, that you can use to pull it on and off. And that structure comes from just kind of a film reinforcement there and a little bit of an underlay there. There are no underlays anywhere else on the upper. There's maybe a tiny bit of structure here to the mesh to keep it off the toes, but it should be fine for a short distance racer like this. The sock liner is glued down, so I'm not going to remove it. Everything about this shoe is light. Going down to the midsole, for a shoe this light, it's an impressive amount of midsole. The stack is 27 millimeters in the heel, 23 millimeters in the forefoot. One would think it's a negative drop because of the way it looks, but no, it's not a negative drop. It's just angled so that it's really at its most propulsive when you're rocking off the toe like that. That doesn't seem like a lot of stack, but it's all Zoom X foam. And for a shoe that is under 130 grams in my size, the left shoe is 127 grams, the right shoe is 130 grams. That is 4.5 ounces and 4.6 ounces respectively. Then that's still a good amount of foam. There is a carbon plate in there. From what I understand, it's the same geometry as the Vaporfly 4 carbon plate, but it's slightly thinner, like 6 layers instead of 8 layers. I'm not sure what comprises a layer of carbon plating, but that's just what I have heard. If we move to the outsole, very minimal outsole on the heel. It's sort of like the Vaporfly 4, but less so. And I imagine that's just kind of to protect it against abrasion when you're walking around before the race, because I don't think you should be spending a lot of time on your heel when running in this shoe. Similar channel to the Vaporfly 4 to save a lot of the weight of the midsole through the center line of the shoe. And you can see the carbon plate, which, tap the plate. And then you've got the classic waffle pattern on the forefoot. And again, for a 4.5 ounce shoe, this waffle pattern feels pretty rugged. And it's definitely more coarse and more scuffed up than the smooth outsole that's on the forefoot of the Vaporfly 4. And that smooth outsole on the Vaporfly 4 isn't so bad. After a run or two, it seems to grab just fine. But this seems very grabby. It's an exciting shoe to look at and to hold in my hand, and I can't wait to get it on foot and do some fast reps in it and compare it with some other shoes I have that are in that line. I've been thinking about the shoe off even before getting this shoe on foot, and I think it's going to be a good one. All right, I look forward to bringing it to you guys. Hey, I just did a first very short run in the Nike StreakFly 2. Very short, it was probably less than 2 kilometers, but I'm about ready to do a medium long run today, and I'm not going to do it in this shoe. Just wanted to get the feel for it by itself before I compared it to anything else or did any workouts in it. And it does want to go fast. It's a little bit more than I expected it to be, I think, in a good way. So I'm looking forward to comparing this with other shoes, getting it on the road for some workouts and possibly races. All right, I just did a workout in the Nike StreakFly 2. I did 5 by 1,000 on the roads at goal 5K pace, which is 3:30 per kilometer, and that works out to about 5:37, 5:38 per mile. And that's what I was holding on to, was 5:36s and 5:37s. The last kilometer was at a 5:32 pace. And what was easier for me was just plugging 3 minutes and 30 seconds into the watch and trying to run a kilometer or more in that time. And I did it off of 60 seconds rest. When I did this workout 2 weeks ago in the Vaporfly 4, I had 90 seconds rest and I was dying. I could barely make it through the workout. I had less rest today, and I went in with a little bit more gunk in the legs, and I performed better and felt better. And I don't necessarily want to attribute it to the shoes, but they certainly felt like they were the weapon of choice for this workout and for the 5K in general. I was talking to Anthony and John, who were doing the run with me, saying when I was running marathons in the Vaporfly or maybe the Endorphin Elite, where you feel like you have the perfect marathon shoe and it feels like it's just cruising at that effort, then that's how the StreakFly 2 feels at 5K effort. So right now, this is at the top of the list for what I'm going to wear in the Boston 5K, but there's still more testing to do. All right, Friday workout. I did 3 sets of 1 mile at 10K effort, followed by 2 by 400 at 3K effort. So it's mile, 400, 400, mile, 400, 400, mile, 400, 400. And I did that on the roads, actually on the greenways. I did the first set in the Nike StreakFly 2. Then I changed shoes for the second set, did the second set in the 361 degrees Miro Nude. And then the final set went back to the StreakFly 2, just to get a real test of the StreakFly 2 versus the other shoe, because those are likely contenders for my 5K race. And I can tell you right now, I'll go into it more in the shoe talk, but the StreakFly is definitely going to be a lot more appropriate for that race than the Miro Nude. It felt really good at those paces. When I was at the 10K effort, it rolled along nicely, but it still kind of wanted to go faster and still had a lot of punch at the 3K efforts. So we'll talk about more later in the shoe talk. Okay, it's time for a shoe off, and we have the Nike StreakFly 2 in the middle here. And I'm going to be testing it against the StreakFly 1, the original version, the New Balance SC Pacer V2, the New Balance FuelCell 5280, a blast from the past, the Adidas Takumi Sen 8, the Asics Metaspeed Edge Paris, and the 361 degrees Miro Nude. This shoe off is going to be a little bit different than some of the others you might be used to, and I'll explain that on my warm-up. Okay, so I forgot to explain it on the warm-up, but what I did during this shoe off, I've already done the shoe off, is since I had to test the shoes at something approaching 5K pace or faster, that's not really conducive to conversation while running like I normally do during a shoe off. So I did the rep. I did a fast 400 meter rep in each shoe with one shoe on each foot. And then I talked about my thoughts directly after that rep, rather than talking while running and fighting for my breath. StreakFly 1 versus StreakFly 2. StreakFly 2 is definitely lighter and more rigid because it has a carbon plate and the one doesn't. The one definitely feels like it has more foam underfoot, which it does, but that foam is spread throughout the midsole evenly, like a lot of performance trainers or racers, meaning it feels like there's more in the heel, whereas the StreakFly 2, even though it has a higher stack in the heel, that part's very thin. There's definitely more volume of foam under the forefoot, which is what you're really bouncing off of doing well, I guess that rep was about 5:15 per mile pace, a little faster than 5K pace, but good for testing. All right, on to the next one. Okay, New Balance SC Pacer V2 versus the Nike StreakFly 2. Very different shoes, intended for the same purpose if you were to ask their manufacturers, but the Pacer V2 feels like a max stack racing shoe compared to the StreakFly 2. And it's not max stack, it's 32 millimeters in the heel, but that is 5 millimeters more than the StreakFly. It feels like more than that though, because sort of like with the StreakFly 1, the cushion is pretty evenly distributed as for what you would expect for a running or racing shoe, biased towards the heel. Still plenty of cushion under the forefoot, whereas the StreakFly is really putting a lot of their energy return off of that forefoot. I feel like the SC Pacer V2 is something you could train in and still possibly race in, whereas the StreakFly 2 is something that you're not going to take out for an easy run or even just an up-pace moderate run. You're going to take it out for your reps or for your race day. And it just feels like it has more pop but less protection. All right, the New Balance FuelCell 5280 versus the Nike StreakFly 2. The 5280, you don't really see these around much anymore because it's a shoe that came out with a singular purpose, and that was to race a fast road mile. It could go a little bit longer than a mile. In fact, my 5K PR is still in the 5280. That was on a pancake flat course at an airport on a runway with 3 turns. I don't know that at my age, about 8 years later, 7 or 8 years later, that I could do a 5K in this shoe anymore. But anything under 800 meters, I would probably take the 5280 over the StreakFly 2. However, the StreakFly 2, I think, has taken over that fast, short course specific super shoe role and does it better. There's a lot more compliance and response from the ZoomX foam than in the old school FuelCell foam. It feels like there's just more underfoot too. This is the only shoe so far where I felt like the StreakFly 2 is more underfoot. I think the StreakFly 2 is going to be the short course fast racer for the 2020s. That's the decade of the 2020s, not the time. I can't think of anything in that 3-minute to 30-minute race duration where I would take the 5280 over the StreakFly 2. Okay, the Nike StreakFly 2 and the Adidas Takumi Sen 8. The Takumi Sen 8 used to be my most performance-oriented crossover super shoe, you know, where it crosses over with the racing flat category. But next to the StreakFly 2, it feels built up. It feels a little bit firmer, less flexible. It doesn't feel as compliant. It feels like it could stand longer distances, but I'm not going to get the same pop. It's just going to be more of a firm response. It still has more of the classic Light Strike Pro that you would find in the Adios Pro 3, not the really gushy, bouncy stuff in the Adios Pro 4. And these are glass fiber rods, carbon infused glass fiber rods in it, which should make it a little more flexible than the StreakFly 2, but it doesn't, because the StreakFly 2 has a plate that's thinner than some of the other super shoes like the Vaporfly, and the ZoomX foam is a lot more compliant. So I feel like there's a little bit more flexibility while still just the right amount of rigidity that allows you to really pop off the pavement. So in a world of StreakFly 2s, I don't think I would need to take the Takumi Sen 8 out for any kind of race, but I could potentially for a fast tempo workout or an interval workout where I want to save the StreakFly 2s. Okay, I have the ASICS Metaspeed Edge Paris and the Nike StreakFly 2 here. Sorry, I'm talking right after doing these hard 400 meter reps, so I do have to catch my breath a little bit. So this was a fun one. The Metaspeed Edge Paris is intended to be in that mid-course tier of super shoes where it can do the marathon, it can do the 5K. I think it really excels at races of about an hour, but I've had a lot of success at the 5K distance with this shoe. So these right now are among the ones that I'm considering for the 5K in Boston. Next to the StreakFly 2, the Metaspeed Edge Paris feels really compliant, really soft, really bouncy. Next to other super shoes, the Edge Paris feels a little bit more firm and snappy. That tells me that the StreakFly 2 is really snappy. You're really focusing on the snappiness and not really the bounce. So it's really specialized towards those shorter distances. On that rep, the foot that had the StreakFly 2 actually felt more stable, as in less of a medial overpronation, because there's less stack height and I'm more on the toes. Whereas, you know, there's plenty of room to move and crash in on the Edge Paris. Usually for a 5K, I'm not worried about that. Even for something like a 10 miler, I'm not worried about that. But it was in my mind. So I think if I really want to focus on full send, full snappiness, you know, throw comfort to the wind, then the StreakFly 2 might be the choice for a really fast 5K effort. But we'll see, because I really like running in the Edge Paris. It's not out of the conversation. All right, last one. The 361 degrees Miro Nude versus the Nike StreakFly 2. So the Miro Nude is the only shoe out of all of these that is actually lighter than the StreakFly 2, but we're talking by 7 to 10 grams in my size, which is a third of an ounce. And I challenge you to feel that weight side by side on foot. It's pretty much the same weight. They're both super light. What is different is the bias in the midsole, the emphasis in the midsole. The Miro Nude has something of a heel bevel, heel and forefoot bevel. So it is really biased towards the midfoot. And that's good for someone like me. I am a midfoot to forefoot striker, although at 5K efforts, I'm definitely favoring the forefoot, which is why the StreakFly feels a little bit more responsive, but the Miro Nude feels more compliant. So it would depend between these two, first of all, on availability, because it's hard to get the Miro Nude in the States at this moment. It would depend also on where you really feel like you're cruising through your stride at those high intensity paces. Every race, even a 5,000 meter, has lulls where you're really kind of cruising and trying to settle in to a rhythm. And at those times, you're not just bouncing off that forefoot and digging and digging and digging the whole time. It might help to have something with a little more bias toward the midfoot or even rear foot for some runners. I usually, even when I'm cruising, and kind of favoring more of the forefoot. Both of these two shoes, as well as the Metaspeed Edge Paris, are going to be in my consideration for racing the 5K at Boston. That's just how I feel. I do like the snap of the StreakFly 2, but I need to get some more workouts in it before I decide whether or not it's going to be my A race shoe. Okay, it's shoe talk time. So we have the Nike StreakFly 2. I will say, in short, this shoe is incredibly well designed for the purpose for which it was built. It's just that that purpose is a very specific purpose, and it's a very narrow wheelhouse compared to many of the other running shoes that you've seen reviewed on this channel, or just the other the super shoes that might be more similar to it. And that purpose is for racing a fast road race in what for me is the 5K, maybe up to 10K, certainly down to 1 mile range. What I think is going to be any race that's less than 30 minutes in duration, probably better suited for something less than 20 minutes. When you compare it to other super shoes, like its big brother, the Vaporfly, or the A6 Metaspeed shoes, which I'll talk about in a little while, then it is extremely stripped down. But it is more than enough for what it was suited for. I am a forefoot to midfoot striker. The faster I run, the more on my forefoot I am. And this shoe is really biased towards the midfoot, not only with the width of the midfoot and how narrow it is in the rest of the profile, but also just where and how the cushion is distributed and how the plate comes down and curves and really biases that toe off. And if you were to sit it flat, it would not look natural. Now, if you land on your heel, you're not going to kill yourself. It's just not something you want to be in the habit of doing. You're not going to want to be in the habit of a hard heel strike on this. I have about 22.5 miles on this shoe, which I think is, what is that, 35 to 36 kilometers in this shoe, which I think is enough for testing for a short distance racer like this. And its wheelhouse is really in the 5K pace for me, which my goal 5K pace is about 3:30 per kilometer or 5:36 to 5:38 per mile. It can hang well at 10K pace, although it clearly wants to do 5K pace. If you take something like the Vaporfly line, really I would talk about another Vaporfly, but this is the one I have in my hand, where a Vaporfly feels really good at half marathon pace, or where an Alpha Fly feels really good at marathon pace. That's how this feels at 5K pace. If I were to try and run marathon pace in this, I would want something more under my feet. So I want this to run fast and to not be in it for very long. Some of the runs I did where I had warm-ups and cool-downs, recoveries in between reps, I could definitely feel that my calves were worked. And part of that is the low drop, the forefoot bias, and the fact that this shoe is not meant to be taking on, a 9-mile run a couple of times. It's meant to be there just for those fast runs. It is, I think, the best shoe in that tier of super shoes that specializes in the short distance races, including the Takumi Sen, including the 361 degrees Miro Nude. This is a good shoe, and when I was testing it head to head, both in the shoe off and in a particular workout where I was doing mile repeats and 400s, this was a lot more compliant. You were setting into it a lot more, but you didn't get the snapback that you did out of the StreakFly 2, and that's why I'm going to be going with the StreakFly 2 or the ASICS Metaspeed Edge Paris for the Boston 5K. The reason I might go with the Metaspeed Edge Paris over the StreakFly, still haven't decided yet, is this might save my legs so that I still don't have wrecked calves when I do the Boston Marathon 2 weeks later. Although if I only use this for the race, I might be all right. We'll see. I'll do next week's workouts in this and see which one I pack for Boston. I also want to talk about the Nike family of super shoe racers, and I have them all here. I have the StreakFly 2, I have the Vaporfly 4, and I have the Alpha Fly 3. And I think these three shoes really encapsulate what I believe are the 3 tiers of super shoes. You have your long course racer, which really specializes in the marathon, maybe half marathon. Think over 90 minutes, approaching 2 hours, 3 hours or more on foot. Then you have your all-arounders, which would really do well in the 30 to 90 minute race duration, which they could also go up to a marathon or go down to a 5K, but really they're going to be balancing between lightweight and going the distance. And then you have these guys, which are just speed demons. This has the smallest wheelhouse. I wouldn't take this past 10K, and for 10K I would probably want something like this, or more specifically like this, if we're being honest. Since Nike has this family ready-made for you, you could have the whole range of super shoes covered with just Nike if you wanted. However, if you're going to get one super shoe and it's going to be a Nike, I would say get the Vaporfly 4. It's not my favorite, but it's certainly versatile. I would still probably get this over the Vaporfly 4, but if you're sticking with Nike. However, if you're going to chip in for 2 of them, don't get the Vaporfly, get the Alpha Fly, and get the StreakFly. because where this meets its fastest end, that's where this is starting to take over. Not a whole lot of crossover, maybe right around the 10K, but I think both of these are better in their respective wheelhouses than the Vaporfly 4 is, even though this is kind of an all-rounder. And this is, don't get me wrong, this is a good shoe, but if you go back to my review, I think there are just a lot more in that middle tier that are better than this one. All right, so that is my shoe talk. Mainly about the StreakFly 2, but about some other shoes as well. If you're going to get this shoe, it's $180 in the US, and it's probably going to be that price for a while. Whole bunch of other colors that are out now. But yeah, I would only get it if you're really going to focus on those short distances at fast paces, or if you want just something for intervals. Although if you're going to go do those at a track, get an unplated racing flat type of shoe like the Adios 9. Save some money, build some leg strength, and just get this for races. All right, don't forget to like, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications. Leave a comment if you have a question about the StreakFly 2 or any of the other shoes I review, or if you just want your opinion to be heard. I love the differing opinions that you guys present. Thanks, guys, and I'll see you on the next run.